Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into what you might call an aircraft's medical history, yet we're talking about maintenance records. Now, I know it might sound like just a giant mountain of paperwork straight out of Engineer Jabez A. Isserly's AMT 231 Lesson 5, but make no mistake about it, this is literally the life-saving paper trail of the aviation industry. Every single safe flight relies heavily on the documents we're about to explore.
So, here's the game plan for today. We'll start with the vital paper trail itself. Then we'll look at the heavy responsibility falling squarely on the owner's shoulders. After that, we'll unpack 14 CFR Part 91.417, break down the actual anatomy of a record, and finally wrap up with permanent versus temporary records. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Aviation's Vital Paper Trail, and specifically, the real scope of these records. To get started, we really need to understand exactly what pieces of the aircraft generate this massive trail. As Engineer Isserly outlines, we're not just looking at the airplane as one single big unit. No, we are meticulously tracking records for the airframe, the engines, even rebuilt engines, the propellers, and the rotors. But wait, it doesn't stop there. We're also tracking appliance records, airworthy parts tags, and airworthiness directives. Basically, every single major component has its own distinct, undeniable history that has to be accounted for. It's like a giant puzzle of accountability.
Moving on to Section 2, the owner's heavy responsibility. Put simply, who is actually on the hook here?
Let's dive into the legal reality for a second. It's a pretty high-stakes question. When the paperwork goes missing, or, when an FAA inspector comes knocking to verify an aircraft's safety, whose door do they go to? Who carries the ultimate burden of making sure these records are flawless? Is it the mechanic who actually turned the wrench? Actually, no. The answer is the owner or operator. They bear the absolute ultimate burden for maintaining the aircraft's maintenance records. And their job doesn't just end there. They're also legally mandated to present these records to maintenance personnel whenever work is being done. They are, for all intents and purposes, the ultimate guardians of the aircraft's history.
And there's more. The owner has to make absolutely sure those maintenance personnel are making the appropriate entries in the logbooks. Specifically, the owner has to verify that the paperwork includes one very specific, very important phrase. The aircraft has been released to service. Seeing that exact phrase written down is absolutely crucial. It marks the legal and physical handover. It tells everyone that the experts have finished their work, documented it all perfectly, and officially cleared that machine to fly safely once again.
Which brings us to Section 3, Understanding 14 CFR Part 91.417. Let's look at the regulatory solution to all this.
So you might be wondering, where do all these incredibly strict rules actually come from?
Well, they certainly aren't just polite industry suggestions, that's for sure. They come directly from Title 14 CFR Part 91.417. This is the specific Federal Aviation Regulation, or FAR, that lays out the absolute hard and fast requirements for keeping and maintaining appropriate aircraft records. Think of this regulation as the ultimate solution for organizing what could otherwise be total chaos in aviation maintenance. It literally sets the standard for the entire industry. And let's be real, with the sheer weight of the FAA's rulebook, getting on their bad side over some missing paperwork is a headache nobody wants. What's really fascinating here is the sheer variety of maintenance events the owner has to formally document under this specific rule. 14 CFR Part 91.417 explicitly states that records have to be kept for general maintenance and alterations, plus your specific inspection cycles. We're talking the 100-hour inspections, the annuals, and progressive inspections. Basically, every single time a maintenance action happens, it drops into one of these legally mandated buckets, and boom, it must be logged.
Okay, on to Section 4, the anatomy of a maintenance record. Let's go through this detail by detail. Let's break down what actually goes into these logs piece by piece to meet those FAR requirements. First off, every record absolutely must be explicitly tied to the exact aircraft. You can't just have some loose piece of paper floating around the hangar. The records have to be identified using these core identifiers: the aircraft's registration number, the make, the model, the serial number, and the location. This whole shebang guarantees that the maintenance action is undeniably, forever, linked to one specific physical aircraft.
Next up, the record has to include some really critical time-based metrics. As we all know, aviation runs on flight hours, so you must track the total time in service. You also need to know the exact status of life-limited parts, or LLPs, and crucially, you have to track the time since overhaul, the TSO, for any items that require an overhaul on a strict time basis. Tracking these 3 specific elements is what prevents critical components from being pushed past their safe operational lifespan.
But it's not just about the ticking clock. You've also got safety mandates. This means recording the current status of all applicable airworthiness directives, or ADs. The log has to show the exact method of compliance, the revision date, and the specific time or date when the next action is due if it happens to be a recurring AD. On top of all that, you have to list the current major alterations to each airframe, engine, propeller, and appliance. It creates a completely transparent, unbroken history of the aircraft's safety compliance.
Finally, we reach the sign-off. When the maintenance is actually done, the log has to show the date the work was completed, along with a description or a reference to FAA-acceptable data for the work performed. But here is the most vital part: accountability. The person approving the work for return to service must attach their name, their signature, and their certificate number directly to that maintenance record. By doing that, they are literally putting their professional credentials on the line, personally vouching for the safety of that aircraft.
Let's wrap things up with Section 5, permanent versus temporary records. Just how long do they actually have to survive?
So you've gone through the trouble of generating all this meticulous paperwork, but how long do you actually have to keep it? Well, Title 14 CFR Part 91417 makes a really clear distinction between permanent and temporary records. Believe it or not, it actually allows the owner to throw away certain parts of the records, the temporary ones, after they've fully served their purpose. But on the flip side, there is a strict list of records that must be retained forever. These permanent records include the total time and service of the airframe, the current status of those life-limited parts, and the time since the last overhaul for items on a time-based overhaul schedule. Those numbers are the absolute lifeblood of the aircraft's history, and they can never, ever be thrown away.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer covering AMT 231 Lesson 5. As you digest all these strict regulatory requirements, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. When you finally sign your name and certificate number to a maintenance log, are you fully prepared to carry the legal weight of that aircraft's safety? As you continue your studies, really ask yourself if you're truly ready for the immense responsibility that comes with the simple stroke of a pen. Thanks for hanging out and learning with us today, and remember, a safe flight always starts with a perfect paper trail.